Part two. So in this section, this one is only a handful of slides, but there's a lot of information packed into this handful of slides. We're going to be talking about the sources that trend forecasters use to gather all the information. We talked about how they're going to gather. You're going to hear that word a lot. There's always more sources, probably that I listed. I listed 15 here, which is still a lot of sources if you think about going into one job, gathering from all of these places. But 15 sources we're going to talk about where they gather that information. Okay, so that's part two. Part three, we're going to finish up with the qualifications. We're going to talk about a specific, the most successful trend forecasting company, and just wrap it up. So there has to be a source, right? There has to be a source to get information, and it really does depend on the sector in which that trend forecaster works for. If they work for a specialized segment or a consumer segment, so if they're investigating stuff for women's contemporary clothing, or if they're looking at home fashions, right? They are going to get their information from different sources. So let's talk about some of the sources, right? There's always a wide range of information that they can find. And one is what we just talked about, right? The different types of forecasters. One includes, market research firms, which are just, companies that just provide specific information on, consumer markets. The word that we use in business and in fashion as well is your target market or your target customer, right? Your target consumer. So they get that information on those segments. And again, when we talked about, the population and changes, right? So that demographic data. So age, education, residence, family size, occupation, income, how much money we spend. Think about it when you're given the post-shopping survey, right, with many of the places that we shop. Those are the type of questions they ask. What's your age range? What's your household size? What's your educational background? Because they want to understand that information, right? And then, more general government data and geographical demographics is available through such places as the U.S. Census Bureau, which we are going through the census as we speak, right? So that's one of the ways, right? Of course, they get inspiration, as I mentioned earlier, from couture collections, because these are considered our forward-thinking designers. So Dior and Chanel and Celine and Gucci, just those couture brands, right? And just that list of influential designers can be really long, and it does depend on what your demographic is, right? So, like we can see, translations of items from, Chanel and Gucci in Forever 21 and Walmart, right? In some of those fast fashion, lower end stores, and that introduction of their collections is really important because they influence the future of ready to wear, those couture collections, right? And then on the flip side of couture to couture collections is also new designers. And up and coming designers, they have a different lens, right? They're often willing to try things that are unusual or different or innovative. Sometimes they just establish enthusiasm and interest more than some of the more established brands. And so trend forecasters always want to be the one to catch on to the new trend as well. So they seek new places to find design and inspiration talent. And that's why Project Runway is such a big deal, right? It's the finding of the new designer, the new voice, the new outlook, the new, right? That's what those new designers do. And now they just don't look to fashion design schools anymore. They look at entrepreneurial businesses, because oftentimes people that are many of the new up and coming designers didn't necessarily go to fashion school, and so new designers is really important. Okay, trade shows. There are so many trade shows. If there's an industry, there's a trade show for it. So it could be international fabric and fiber trade shows or markets. There's a huge international textile fair that's in Dubai. There's a one in Paris. It's called Premier Vision. That's what this the graphic that's on the page behind you. It's a textile fair. So those are sources um, for forecasters that are researching that type of information. And then, of course, there's apparel and accessory trade shows. There's a huge trade show in Vegas called Magic that is just apparel, and it's every type of apparel. And of course, just, wandering through some of the markets in New York and LA, Dallas. Vegas actually does have a very, for it to be Vegas especially, has a pretty prominent fashion market. And then, for things like home textiles and furnishings, believe it or not, North Carolina is the place to go. It's actually, the city's called High Point, North Carolina. There's a whole industry of home furnishings and home goods just in North Carolina. And then finally, of course, website and blogs, those internet sources, right? Those e-sources, website and blogs, and online music, and just social networking, of course, those are influencers, right? And then there may be specific trend forecasting resources. So, like I said, after this part of the lecture is over, I will provide links to some of those resources. Of course, there are, design sources that exist out in the world. So, reference books, historical costume collections. When I worked at Ralph, Ralph had an entire warehouse that was the archive. You can't see my air quotes. That was the archive of historical, things that he had designed in his 40 plus year career, and then also, things that he had purchased to use as uh, as reference for later, So, vintage clothing shops and antique dealers and museums, and all of those are resources for forecasters when they're exploring past fashion to figure out what future fashion is going to look like. And we do that. I am a fashion show runway fanatic, and there's some coming up. Oh, CFDA has some stuff coming up. So those things, right? Those design sources. Of course, publications, right? So trade journals and magazines. So we're going to be later. We're going to be looking at a trend forecaster that does work with British Vogue. We'll talk about her in a few minutes. So those are obviously very easy sources of inspiration. So looking at things from those industry magazines and trade journals, right? The arts, right? So music and concerts, just those visual presentations, and theater, all those things can influence or interrelate with fashion trends, right? So, photography or an apparel exhibit that travels internationally can influence fashion trends. Okay. Of course, celebrities, right? They just influence a lot of things in our life, and people, music in the news and talk shows and red carpets, videos, all that stuff. They definitely set trends, and they are looked as a source of what forecasters should be watching for, up and coming, or just what a regular celebrity, what they're wearing, their interpretation of what they're wearing, right? And then, consumer tracking. So I keep coming back to demographics. Demographics are really important because you have to understand your target market and your target customer and what they're willing to buy, not just what they're willing to buy, what they're willing to spend on the thing that they love. So, it's just that data that refers to how much money they make and how much they spend on clothing and entertainment. So that definitely relates to how a consumer, not only what they spend, but how they spend it, right? So how they make those purchases. So do they make luxury purchases in cash? Do they put them on a credit card, right? Those things are all really important for the forecaster to understand. Okay, we're almost there. This is the last the last set of trends. So you're like, Professor Johnson, really? 15 sources? Yes, there are that many sources, right? So lifestyle trends, right? And that this also goes back to, again, I keep saying demographics, right? That consumer tracking piece, right? And it just refers to those the interests, right? The values, the attitudes, the dreams, and the goals of the population, right? So there may be a shift, but in how we spend, but also just where we are in our values and thinking. And if we think about what has happened to us during the pandemic, there has been a lifestyle shift for us, right? So we're at home, more isn't even the right word we're going to use it. We're at home, but many of us have reevaluated, right, how we've been living our life. I know I have, right? So we used to be running. We always had stuff to do, and it was nice to slow down. So it has affected, what we do, what our life looks like. So, workout wear, casual attire, we have been definitely wearing more than that, and we've had an increased focus on our home. So we did some home improvements, and we've definitely been in our backyard more. So, as a result, changes in my apparel purchases have diminished greatly. I've been focusing on accessories instead, but I've definitely bought more cookware, and we bought new patio furniture, so those type of things, right? So what so going forward, if we were to look forward a few 6-8 months, changes in, and I'm just going to refer this to apparel, changes in apparel is going to see, we're going to see less, in my air quotes, business attire, and we're going to see more athleisure out in the stores, right? So that's really important, and it just goes into the next source, which is psychographics, and that just takes the step one step further. So it includes people's lifestyles, but it also includes their behavior. So, where they like to vacation, the type of interests that they have, the values that they hold, and how they behave, right? And forecasters really endeavor to become aware of these changes before they occur. So the pandemic put us in a tailspin, so they couldn't identify those. But that's what they're doing now. They are identifying those psychographic trends and making sure that they're ready for upcoming upcoming seasons. Upcoming season is really important, right? Also, gathering places. So where do we gather now, right? And what does that look like, especially in this time? So, what do shopping malls and Times Square and some of those places? Trend forecasters have to look at where we're going, what we're wearing. It definitely has a mask included, right? And what are we buying? And if we just look at mask, we have seen high-end designers, right? Burberry just had I saw an ad for Burberry masks the other day. I was in the Lucky Store. The Lucky Store, all the employees have Lucky masks, which are really nice. They were nice denim. Adidas quickly came out with masks. Like my husband ordered some Adidas masks for the kids, actually for him and the kids. So those things, right? Those places where people gather, and how we're gathering now is going to influence trends, right? Always streetwear, right? So, and even though we aren't out as much, but just that street scene. Worth Global Style Network is a key forecasting resource. We will have to talk about them a little bit later, and we'll have the link to them at the end of this chapter as well. So we'll talk about them at the end. I brought them up, but we'll keep going with them, okay? And then last, sport and fitness trends, right? So, generally in an Olympic year, which this would have been, right? There is in 2020, there is a move towards more athletic wear. That's often, imitated or modified for streetwear, and the fact that we are home is definitely pushing athleisure to the forefront, even more so than it was before we were all forced to be home.